Good afternoon, and welcome to NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinar Series, our premier digital platform featuring a variety of programs to provide you timely, engaging, and essential education when and where you need it most. My name is Merl Gilbert, the Deputy Director of Events here at NCIA, and as always, I'm very excited to welcome you all to another edition of our ongoing NCIA Committee Insight Series today, being hosted by NCIA's Retail or Risk Management and Insurance Committees. Apologies. If you're just joining us, please stay on the lookout for housekeeping and orientation instructions to be relayed via the chat window, so we're not taking up any more valuable time with routine info. But if you have any questions on how to participate in this virtual event, don't hesitate to reach out to myself, Merl Gilbert, or my colleague, Brooke Gilbert, anytime via a private message within the Zoom webinar platform. Now, let's get this show on the road. As we all know, cannabis business owners are faced with a myriad of challenges, and sound risk management methods can protect against both financial and reputational loss. In this edition of our NCIA Committee Insight series entitled How to Develop a Risk Management Program for Your Cannabiz, we're joined by a panel of expert loss control managers for an in-depth look at how to identify, reduce, and manage exposure to loss in 2021 and beyond. We have a lot of information to cover and a very important topic to explore, so let's not waste any more time. To kick things off, I'd like to welcome our moderator, Stephanie Esposito, the co-founder and president of marketing at Cannabis Connect Insurance Services, to the virtual stage. Before we get started, why don't you tell the audience a little bit more about your own background and expertise, Stephanie, before turning it over to each of the panelists to do the same.
Awesome. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. So as Brian mentioned, not only that, I develop custom risk management portfolios for cannabis operators nationwide, and I've been doing so since 2016. Also, I'm excited and honored to be the chair of the Risk Management and Insurance Committee of the NCIA this year. So thank you so much for having me. So with that, I want to kick it off to the rest of our team and our expert panels that we have for today's call. And I'd like to start off with Summer Jenkins, if she can just do an introduction of herself for all of you.
Hi, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon for some of you. My name is Summer Jenkins. I am the Business Development Manager at Cannabiz Insurance. I have a pretty eclectic background in the insurance industry, having started in the early 2000s, I'm like late 99, 2000. I've worn many hats, and I'm blessed to be participating in this panel and active in the cannabis, legalized cannabis industry today. So I actively design customized insurance programs to fit the needs of those in the emerging industry. I also advocate and consult on claims, and am active in the social equity space for the cannabis industry. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Summer. Next, we have Doug Esposito.
Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Doug Esposito. I am the cannabis practice leader for Assured Partners. We're a national brokerage. My local brokerage is Owen Dunn Insurance Services. And I've been active for the last 6 years as an insurance broker representing various companies to the operators. And I'm also the co-chair of the Risk Management Committee for the California Cannabis Industry Association. So I look forward to being on the panel with my peers. Thank you.
Right on. Thank you, Doug. Next, we have Jesse Parenti.
Afternoon, everybody. Jesse Parenti, Program Director for 9 Point Strategies. We are a national risk management firm. We've been in the space for well over 10 years now. I personally have been hyper-focused in the space for about 5 years nationally. My background actually comes in transportation. In another world, I'm one of the largest food delivery and transportation risk managers in other space for food, pizza, and so on. In the process of, we're very heavily invested in the transportation space, employee protection space, and really excited to be able to give value information to all of our people today. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jesse. And last but not least, Merl Gilbert.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me and putting this wonderful panel together. I'm really thrilled to be part of this conversation. I am the co-founder and CEO of Trace Trust. We have been in this space for going into our 5th year, but we come from an extensive background in the food and beverage industry. And so we're very operationally focused. We believe in a very safe and reliable experience, and how to create that from everywhere from cultivation through manufacturing and onto the retail shelf. So we created a True Dose and HGMP, which are both universally recognized standards for dose accuracy in cannabis and hemp products. So today is, and I am the past chair of the Education Committee and a recent member of now the Risk Management Committee, and thrilled to be here today. So looking forward to it, and I'll turn this back over to you, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We really appreciate your time and your insight. So for the learning objectives today, we have a few of them. So as mentioned earlier from Brian, how to define and reduce risk, ways to transfer and reduce risk using avoidance, insurance, and contracts. The next is, what are the different elements of risk, and lessons learned from COVID-19 and how to prepare for the new year. So I'm going to dive right in, and this question goes to Merl. So Merl, what is the state of cannabis and hemp in 2020, and where do you foresee it going in 2021?
Thank you. That's such a great place to start. So the big news of 2020 was that in any state that had some form of legal access, we are recognized an essential business. And I think that that has proven over these 9 months that we have been all in some form or another reacting to COVID-19, whether it's in our business life and our personal life. And so it really brought the destigmatization down around cannabis and hemp, and access to these safe and reliable products, and how to find them and enjoy them. So that was number one. The second is that with that, we've also seen this amazing increase in our November 3rd election brought this home, with so many more states now coming on board. And we now know that there's about 63% of all Americans that are looking for some form of decriminalization or access in their own state. So if there's a change in the Senate, most likely we'll quickly see decriminalization, and then we'll also start to see a push towards federal legalization. So that's a very much the success of the ballot. With more states that do have legal access, we're going to see a very big increase, not only in the rush of products to this, but an increase in the cultivation side of this. So there's going to be a lot more focus on regulatory bodies, on compliance, and COVID's not going away anytime soon. So there's going to be a lot of emphasis on training and safety. And so these things are really, and then in the hemp cultivation world, you know, a lot of people jumped into this bandwagon, but there's still a very big, there's a big divide between cultivated hemp for consumption and industrial hemp, and that you just can't, you know, pull up your soybeans and start growing hemp. So there's going to be a lot of learning and education for these farmers to transition into this type of a market and how to grow successfully. Another big exciting thing is we are a job generator. So with all these new states, we are going to see a massive amount of job creation in every level, and many people coming in with backgrounds, you know, legal, finance, science, agriculture, everything from retail and marketing. So it's a huge, great thing for not only the industry as a whole, but for our country. And so this is really an exciting time. And the health and wellness sector, again, you know, one of the things that we came out of this year and going into next year is that this is a part of everyone's lifestyle. They want it as an alternative to alcohol. They want it as an alternative to narcotics. And so we're going to see an amazing amount of products, and we're going to see a lot of them in that health and wellness space. And then the last two parts I just want to touch on very briefly is, you know, virtual everything. We're doing a virtual meeting today. So that is a big part of any business structure. So there's a lot of cybersecurity that's going to need to be looked at every level of where you are in the marketplace. And the last part is, with all of this legal access, is research. We are going to see a lot more in academia, medical, and food and beverage, and plant genetics. And so it's a very exciting time, and 2021 is going to be kicking off with quite a lot of excitement.
I love your optimism, and I definitely agree with you. So thank you so much, Merl. And with that, right, when we look at that hockey puck trajectory of growth, we are now, especially on this team of panelists, we're looking at risk, right? And it actually goes in great with my next question. And this question is for both Merl and Doug. And with that, what are the existing risks and exposures cannabis companies need to face in 2021, right? Because now we're having ramped up employees, ramped up, the exposures are expanding quickly. So Merl and Doug, if you can elaborate on that question, I'd love to know the answer.
Merl, why don't you take the lead?
I was going to have you take the lead, but that's great. So, again, I'm just going to touch first on COVID, because that is not changing. So we are going to look at probably not being back together in any meaningful way. And even when we are, that's going to probably be some kind of a hybrid, smaller groups, more virtual, combination of the two. But it's also where we are right now. So everybody had to quickly transition many, operations. So staggering your employees, your onboarding process. Now it's being done again, interviewing, not necessarily in person. And then a big confusion around what do we need to provide? So there's a lot of ongoing changes to your standard operating procedures, to your manufacturing processes, to access in and out of your retail environment. So all along that supply chain, and the supply chain is also compromised at this point in time. We're not even going to really see those repercussions until we get into the next year. But the part around there where there's confusion is in personal protective equipment, PPE. What do we provide? When do we provide it? How do we provide it? And all of the risks. So, I'm going to let the panel, who are much more experienced and have way more expertise in the insurance side of this, but we're not, some claims have gone down because you're not having so much workman's comp, you have not so many assets, people, but we are going to see a big shift in that. So training, development, how to use protective gear, when to use protective gear, what do you have to provide? Do I have to provide some form of testing of my employees and temperature checks? All of these things, from HR again to compliance, are not going away anytime soon, and they're going to continue into the future, and we're going to see them as really becoming everyday scenarios for how we operate our businesses.
And in addition to Meryl's perspective on COVID too, which I think is spot on, really the exposures that a cannabis company face are really similar to every other business. I mean, you've got property, you've got inventory, you've got business interruption, automobile, workers' comp. There are definitely nuances within the cannabis space, but the filter I want to talk about, or at least challenge everyone to think about, is this. There's no other place probably than in cannabis where an actual insurance product is more important as a risk transfer tool, which we'll get to soon, is because you can't just go to a regular bank and take out another loan, or, so it's one of those things where if your insurance isn't in place to make you whole, you're probably going to shut your doors. And I think a lot of folks just don't give the insurance its weight at this early stage. 5 or 10 years down the road, it'll be just like tomatoes. But that was just something I'd like to at least challenge people to look at the insurance with a different filter, because the bank's not going to help you no time soon. Anyhow, thank you.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate that. And that's some really great insight. It's true. So next, actually, I would really like to go to our next question, and this one's directed to Summer. So Summer, what are the different ways to transfer risk?
Thanks, Stephanie. So before I go into the ways to transfer risk, I do want to just discuss, so that everybody's on the same page, what do we mean when we say risk? So all businesses, even human beings, we all are at risk of losing something. So for our purposes, and in the cannabis insurance industry and just general business industry, when we say risk, we mean the business owner's exposure to suffering a monetary loss. So with risk management, the goal would be to get ahead of the possibility or tendency to lose business assets, your personnel assets, and even time. and actuarial people and people that do numbers can actually identify each person and assign a monetary value to even your employees. So these are the things that, as risk management professionals, we really want to help business owners identify and then figure out transfer methods. So in risk management, the basic tenets of risk management are to, one, identify the possibility of loss. So what could you suffer a loss from or because of? And then two, how do we transfer the loss and kind of solve the problem or the propensity to lose our business property or our assets. So the methods of transferring risk for our purposes, we're focusing on insurance because that is one easy way that anybody can transfer some of their exposure to loss to a third party, and that would be the insurance companies. One other way would be via contract. So there are many different types of contracts that you can engage in, whether it be with your vendors, suppliers, or even your third parties who you contract with for services. So with insurance, you are saying that you as the business owner will do something. The insurance carrier agrees to accept your risk and says that they, in exchange for your premium, will do something. And the big word that we like to use in insurance is called indemnity. See, it's a big word. Indemnity or indemnification. And what that means is the insurance company will make you whole again. So the purpose of the policy is not that a person can profit from it, but that you can go on doing your daily work, your daily business, and pursuing whatever mission it is, your business objective, unencumbered by a loss.
Thank you, Summer. I appreciate that. And it's true, because when it goes back to wanting to be whole again, that's really an important thing to emphasize, because insurance, as everyone knows, it's not to get ahead from where you were before. It's really just to bring you back to where you were at that exact moment of the loss. So diving in, this question is for Jesse. What coverages are typically mandated by most cannabis jurisdictions?
Well, this is always a fun conversation, because when it comes to what you need versus what you people buy, there's a big difference. So a lot of this is about education, and I really try to help people realize where we're going is not where we're going to start. And ultimately, you need to know where we're going to be, and it might take 6, 12, 18, 24 months to build the full risk management platform that's needed for your business. Back to like what Doug said earlier, is there's a difference on kind of what the insurance and what people need to have versus what they know they need to have. And there's a big separation between that. And so one of the biggest things, depending on where you are, is there usually has to be a surety bond. I know Michigan has their own type of surety bonds required. California has its own surety bond. These are all determined by the state or the local municipality. Sometimes you have both requiring it. Sometimes it's required by the state. So you need to identify based on your jurisdiction what is needed. From there, the next is general liability. Now, the one thing that's interesting for the cannabis and hemp space is general liability and product liability are usually the same policy. In the cannabis and hemp space, they are cut out and are separated. At a state level, most states are only requiring general liability. The concern for us as risk managers is there's no coverage for that, really, if there's any type of exposure. Product liability is what is actually going to protect a business owner for any type of claim, whether they are liable or even named in a claim. This policy provides your defense. The challenge we have is certain states require it, certain states don't require it, certain municipalities require it, certain municipalities don't require it. So this is really you understanding your local jurisdiction and really diving into what your requirements are, not only for licensing, but really creating your risk management platform that really will protect your business. Because I always tell people, do you want to protect your business or do you want to self-insure? And when people go, what do you mean? I said, the reality, back to like what Doug said, is it's one of those things where what's required, but if you don't actually buy the insurance to protect yourself, one claim will close your doors. And that's really where we want to help people on their P&Ls and understand that there is a cost. And with this cost, you build it into your P&Ls, your pro forma, and we figure out a way to have it become a line item like anything else so that it can become an expense that's covered versus you writing a check because there was nothing there to defend you. From that aspect, the basics come down to, as soon as you go from a business that now has employees, you need to have what's called workman's comp. And workers' comp is a market that is limited. There are more and more markets slowly coming upon the space, but it is a challenge because there's certain states right now that you might only have one carrier and possibly your local state fund or NCCI. So it's one of those challenges with the marketplace. It is very much still immature in that aspect, where we as risk managers are continue to try to rise it up and create and find products for our clients and for their needs. One of the biggest things as well to add on top of your employees is most operators, depending on what their exposure is, may have an auto liability exposure. That could be an owned auto where the employees are driving a vehicle that's owned by the business, or it could be a non-owned auto where the employees are driving their own vehicle on behalf of the business. Both of them are commercial auto. They both have requirements and needs. One of the biggest things that has been a challenge for all of us, and it's slowly getting better, is if you are in the transportation space, specifically if you're doing transport, wholesale, or distribution, depending on how it's categorized in your state, you need a MCP filing. This allows you to transport other people's products on behalf throughout the state. You are not allowed to cross state lines due to federal regulation, but this is a requirement. That requirement from the insurance carriers is challenging. Some carriers are offering it. Some carriers are not offering it. Some carriers will offer it after 1 year experience. So in the process of when dealing with auto, make sure you're working with someone who understands the space, can provide coverage for you, and furthermore understands really what your needs are, because the two things that we're discussing, workman's comp and commercial auto, are probably your biggest costs and your biggest liabilities you have on behalf of your business.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jesse. I really appreciate that. And actually, some of the carriers for auto are requiring 3 years experience. I've just caught wind not too long ago that underwriting guidelines are firming up. So it's definitely one of those things to really talk to your broker and speak with anyone here on this panel going forward before going out to market to get an auto quote or any line of coverage. So great. So the next questions I have here is actually for Doug and Summer. What is product liability intended to cover?
You're on mute, Doug.
Summer, can I jump in and go and talk briefly about general liability, and then I'll let you jump into product liability? Jesse touched on it, folks. And so, as you bifurcate those two, I really kind of call general liability the slip and fall coverage. It's big time for your dispensaries. When someone slips and gets injured in the parking lot, any of those types of situations. So it's definitely critical, but not as important to a manufacturer that won't see any foot traffic. And then obviously the other side of the coin is the product liability. And Summer, I'll let you take the lead on product liability.
Great points. So just like Jesse and Doug just indicated, the cannabis industry differs. The cannabis insurance industry differs in so many ways than most others do, and that the example of general liability and products liability being separated out is huge. So when you see a typical contract, even a contract for leasing a space, they will say products liability, general liability, and the two are generally interchangeable. In cannabis, they're completely separate. And that is in part because of the nature of the cannabis product. The insurance company wants to really identify and price appropriately for that exposure. And then two, the business operations, premises operations exposure, which is, like Doug said, the slip and fall part, is it can be rated and charged for to a much less degree. So in the cannabis industry, the products coverage is exactly what it sounds like it is. It's for your product and completed operations. So that includes your product that you own or a product that you sell. So what oftentimes happens when something goes to litigation, the injured party will name everybody and their brother. So if they bought the product from you, you're going to be named in the lawsuit. If there was a label on the product, that person's going to be named in the lawsuit. If there was a delivery driver that delivered their product, that person's going to be named in the lawsuit. If they can figure out how Jesus Christ might be liable for this loss, he's going to be named in the lawsuit. And I say that jokingly, but also being quite serious, because that is how it happens. So for the cannabis business owner, we hear all the time, I don't have a product. It's been, this is somebody else's product. I just delivered it. It's not mine. Well, all of those things are true. But again, we have to consider the purpose of insurance as a risk transfer method. So you are transferring the risk, which is the risk of you being named in a lawsuit, the risk of somebody ingesting a product, breaking a tooth, becoming injured, or even alleging that they have been injured. That's one thing we have to remember, is that there does not have to be a true valid cause for the loss or the claim or lawsuit. They can feel, think, the medical panel or, attorney panel can decide that this is something that people can sue for, and then we'll start to see a trend in those types of losses. So as a business owner, you want to get ahead of that and purchase a product liability policy, because it's going to cover you for allegations that a product harmed a third party for something. And in insurance speak, because we have our own language, third party is always other people's stuff. So if you hear liability in the name, that means it's for other people's stuff. First party would be your things, your stuff, your property, your own exposure. So your business equipment, that sort of thing. But it's very important to really have a good understanding, and whether or not you care to become well-versed in all things insurance or you don't, it's really important to know who to ask. And one of the great things about being a part of an association or having memberships of peers like we all do here is that where we may not be an expert in one area, we always know who to ask. And the products liability is something that is very important, because oftentimes products liability policies are written on what's called a claims made basis or a claims made and reported basis. And what that means is that the policy has to be enforced at the time of the loss. If it is not enforced at the time of the loss, you have no coverage. Now, a typical policy for other industries would be called an occurrence-based. So when the claim occurred, that the policy that was enforced at that time would be the one responsible for paying that loss. Now, with a claims-made policy or claims-made and reported policy, it's very important that you have an expert or your insurance agent, broker, that understands the nature of these policies, because there's something called a retro date or a prior and pending date. So that means as of that date carries you throughout all of the terms of your policy and says that even though this policy is in effect at the time of this loss, we're going to honor this retro date. We're going to honor retroactively things that happened from this current policy all the way back into that retroactive date. So that's just one of the nuances that's important to be mindful of and to understand when considering product liability policies.
And actually, I really like this section here. So Summer, can you, and I elaborate with my clients all the time, what happens if they decide they get a cancellation notice and they don't pay their bill, and this claims made product liability cancels even for one day? What would happen to the policy?
That's a great question. And it's a loaded question, because we not a good answer. The answer is not good.
No, it's not good, and this is important. So
you lose your date. So with that gap, if it's a nice carrier that has a good relationship with the agent and they care to negotiate with you, they may give you coverage for the period before the gap and carry that on, and the period after the gap and carry that on. So then you would have what's called split dates or split retro dates. Now, because the cannabis industry is new, every carrier does not have the ability to give you split dates. So most likely, in most instances, what will happen is you have lost all your prior coverage, and now you start again effective the day that you reinstate or effective the day you buy a new policy, and you have no coverage for anything prior. So we call that prior acts. So you have no coverage for anything that happened before. So in essence, you have wasted your money on paying for all these policies before, because now you have no coverage. You're starting over again effective as if you started at day one.
So bottom line, everybody listening, pay your insurance bills, please. Doug, go ahead.
And also too, I mean, one of the most basic, premises for buying product liability is, and I hear this from a lot of operators and manufacturers, that, no one's died from ingesting gummies or smoking, a pre-roll. And they say it can't, how much can it harm someone? But as Summer alluded to earlier, you just need to be named in the suit. And so a lot of times we need defense. And so there's a component of it where you want there to be this duty to defend in the policy, so that really, if you're not negligent in any way, that's great, that's awesome, you did a great job, but you still need that defense, and you don't want to come out of pocket for that. And you've got experts that have played in this game. So that's another key reason for product liability, where one of the ways to transfer some of that product liability risk is really through contracts, where if you're distro or you're a dispensary, you really didn't have a hand in let's say, making the vape pen or the cookie or the gummy. So to be added onto their policy through contract and with an additional insured endorsement, that's another really good way to, what we like to say, use other people's insurance before our insurance.
And if I could just add, just let me add one other piece on the ops piece of this, okay? Because this is kind of where I was alluding to and what's coming up going forward. And so this proof of good manufacturing processes is to protect the entire supply chain. So again, you cannot confuse the two of what a regulatory body is requirements, because that is very plant focused and concentrations, THC, CBD, pesticides, solvents, molds, et cetera. It doesn't look at all the ingredients that are in there. It doesn't look at finished goods. And so if you really, in every other industry, you have third-party certification and audit bodies before any product goes into a marketplace. I mean, think of UL for your electronics, think of certified organic for your milk, all of these things. And in our industry, this is the work that Trace Trust is very much involved in leading in not only in a domestic but an international process, is because this is what validates those products all the way through and before they're ingested. And so this is, before we go state to state and international, we really have to get this part right, because that's what continues to protect you. And ideally will help you with your premiums as you go forward, because you can demonstrate that time and time again you can make this product, and you can do an active correct recall where it's necessary.
I just wanted to add, just as a real life example, I've been on both sides of this. We were part of the only legal vape claim that came out of Washington State. My client was one of 7 clients that were named in it. The case went on for 16 months. Without the policy, defense for my client alone would have been $75,000. I have another retailer who was named in a claim. He did not have product liability, and it did cost him over $100,000. And the policy that he would have bought would have cost $11,000. So these are the things of understanding the risk transfer. And people are like, oh, they get kind of what we call sticker shock. But the reality is you're either self-insuring and hiring an attorney at $600 to $900 an hour and writing a check that is, you don't know what it's going to be, or you do the risk transfer, buy the policy, put the controls in place, make sure your indemnification, your contracts are in place. What I always say is we're stacking insurance. And what you want to be is stacking everyone in front of you. And when the case comes to be, you will be released and be taken away, versus it getting pushed down and you're continue to have legal fees increase and increase. So it's your internal culture and what you believe really in risk management, and then working with your risk manager to actually put together that protection.
This is a really hot topic. I really appreciate everyone's insight. And I've seen a few questions come through. We will definitely get to those questions at the end of the panel discussion. So thank you everyone for your passion and excitement and asking a question. So please keep them coming. Moving along here. So Doug, what are some of the biggest exposures for cannabis cultivators, and how can it be mitigated?
Not just cultivation. I'm going to pick on property as a line of coverage. And so whether you're the cultivator, whether you're the extraction facility, the distro or dispensary, I mean, your inventory is one of those things where, I don't know if people truly are looking at it in the light of what they can. Because again, if you can't fall back on taking another round of investments from your investors and or friends and family, you're self-insured, as Jesse said. So I look at property where it's either the building or the contents or the inventory, and really making sure you got a good number. You know, for example, on cultivation, you're going to have the crop that if it's outside and comes inside, you're going to have a much higher limit for 3 months out of the year. So the trick is really figuring out what your typical limits are that you need from an inventory standpoint, and also then really projecting your revenue properly. So if a fire goes down, you know, not only do we have the right inventory levels so that if we have like a co-insurance clause, you could get penalized relatively harshly, but you have your property limits correct and then your business interruption correct too. So for those who don't know business interruption, the basic term is if there's a covered loss, for example, fire, you know, what is the lost revenue, you know, that you would have made during the time that the business is down. And so if it's a fire, that's an easy example we normally always use. I mean, if you're down for 6 months before you can rebuild, you know, what would have been the profits that you could argue, you know, that you could have made? And so those are those things that are going to be your lifeline when a riot happens, when fire happens, you know, that can allow the company to continue to run as a business. If not, sure, you can self-insure anything that you want. And some of my clients do. Just know what it is so that when it happens, can you support a check that keep your business running? So for me, one of the oldest and easiest is your building, your contents, your inventory, and your business interruption.
Well said. Definitely agree with you, Doug. Thank you for that. Jesse, what type of training should cannabis businesses perform with their employees, and where can they find these resources?
I love this topic. I'm a safety guy. I always tell people when they want to save money, it's about their culture and what do they believe in safety, because safety is actually how you save money. And it's about safety, accountability, and it's reinforced by your culture. When it comes to training, OSHA is where it starts. The challenge is it's confusing when people look into OSHA because we are not regulated by the federal government, and federal OSHA does trainings online. The problem is the federal government gives no direction about the cannabis and hemp industry. So this is actually more controlled on a state by state level. California has its own program. Michigan has its own program. A couple of states have their own programs, but you've created this gray area where people want to be safe, but there's not actually a way to actually do the training. My firm actually created the first Cal OSHA cannabis specific OSHA 30 training. I personally have gone through the OSHA 30 training. What I recommend for people is you've got to find resources, and there are companies like ourselves. We work on a national level. It is a very hands-on approach, but you can find local safety experts in your state. The key thing is really understanding what it's about. There's 3 principles when it comes down to your safety module. First is the IIPP, or Injury Illness Prevention Program. Then you have what's called the EAP, which is the Emergency Action Plan. And then you have your CHCP, which is your Chemical Hazard Communication Plan. Those are kind of 3 backbones of your safety module. From there, you need to have someone within your firm that's going to take responsibility for compliance and safety. And then that starts at the management level. Then it goes down to your employees. And then it is reinforced daily, weekly, monthly. It never goes away. And with us, normal PPEs or personal protective equipment, they're gloves, hats, shoes, respirators, full smocks, hair nets, everything is needed. With COVID, it's now put that on steroids. We have trimmers that are now being fully enclosed in plexiglass 6x6 area rooms, so there's no interaction. You've got to be doing testing. You've got to be really checking this daily. So depending on your operation, this really varies from operation to operation. If you're a nursery or cultivation, it's a matter of keeping things clean in your greenhouses or your indoor facilities. From there, when it goes to distribution, okay, what's going on with your drivers? What are the warehouses looking like, and so on. And then as it moves from the testing labs into the retail market, and then even into the delivery market, every level has its own level of PPEs. What you need to do is identify your specific business And if you are only, say, doing one thing, or you're fully vertically integrated and you have multiple licenses, it really comes down to, once again, the sophistication of your compliance department. If you actually have a compliance director, and then from there, you need to even have a safety team. I always say, depending on how diverse your company is, you need a safety officer for every department you have. Your safety team needs to all be coordinated together. And then you need to be working with your risk manager to reinforce the services, because these simple things are the first line of defense for your workman's comp and also your commercial auto. The ergonomics and everything we do, they'll fall under your workman's comp. Employees will get in accidents in the car. This is where it's reinforced in that. So it's a matter of identifying the individual risk, then putting the plan in place, and then reinforcing it, because safety never goes away. It is always being tweaked and improved. And with the world we're in, all of us are learning daily, and so should you.
So
and if I could just add one last thing on that. I'm so sorry. Just on that last training too is, again, I keep talking about this GMP certification, but those audits are really crucial to dovetail into what Jesse was just outlining. And it's not just about making something, right? It really is looking at your business from the inside out and all your opportunities for risk and where you might have to change it. In addition, we, with fellow NCI member SGS Global Services, wrote and offer, the food safety and HACCP training specific for cannabis and hemp. And so these programs really do guide right into mitigating your risk and into your insurance program. So I just want to make sure that we share how important training and ongoing access.
So the point that I wanted to just kind of throw in there is, while all of these things are great, they can appear daunting to the new business owner or someone that wants to get into the cannabis space. So I just want to add in a word of encouragement, because while there is a lot to do, a lot of these services are offered for free or at no cost. The OSHA website, obviously Cal OSHA is free, federal OSHA is free. And while there may not be anything specific to cannabis, there are similarities in a lot of other industries. And then also with your insurance policies, I believe in capitalizing on every opportunity, capitalizing on every investment. So because you have purchased this insurance policy, a lot of insurance carriers offer discounted loss control services, free loss control services, and canned documents that you can adapt for your purposes. So the IIPP, Injury Accident Prevention Program, and the OSHA 30 training, hazard and accident investigation programs. All of these things are really good practices to employ for your business. But if you don't know how to get it, you want it, can't afford it, just ask, ask a Jesse, ask a Doug, ask a Stephanie, ask me. The great thing about the cannabis industry is that we are all actively invested in fortifying the industry and in fortifying the investments of these businesses.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank
to
you.
level, I just wanted to, all we're trying to do is help the industry level up, because we're all in the same boat of solving problems. And back to the point you were just saying, Summer, a lot of this is daunting. I always tell people it's going to take 3 years for us to get it all in place. So just breathe. We're here to help. And in the process of what's the priority today, and that's what we work through. And like you said, I know we all do this. We have no problem leaning hard on the industry and demanding and asking more of them. And that's really where working with anyone in the space, I hate to say it, you don't want to work with someone who's doing this part-time. You need someone who's working on this 100% of the time, because this is changing daily. And for all of us, we're continually learning to stay ahead of it for our clients and prospects. And it's not easy for anyone, including for us. So ultimately, take a breath, but realize a safe business is actually going to be a profitable business, and money you invest in training and support you do now could be tens or hundreds of thousands in a non-reactionary cost down the road that was unintended.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jesse. And two other things is don't forget about a COVID prevention plan, right? We need that. And then what happens, just these are questions to think about. What happens if you have a COVID outbreak at your facility? What are the steps that you have implemented? And do you need help with that? So please reach out to us after this webinar, and we're happy to help you with these resources. So, okay, so we're getting short on time, so I need to move on. it looks like, so Merl, I know we went over PPE a little bit and what it stands for and why it's important, but do you want to just do a quick 1 minute about PPE, and then we got to jump into one last question and then Q&A?
Yeah, I just, again, I think that we've touched on a lot of this, but the COVID issue and personal protective equipment is not going away anytime soon. And so we're really looking at, what do you need to provide? How do people access your facility? Different, staggered time zones. Training, you've got to think of training and development in the same way you think of utilities and turning the lights on. It has to be ongoing. It's not just hiring somebody and saying, hey, here's the manual, good luck. It's like really being active and creating that core leadership team that can continue to monitor your business and knowing that we're here as a resource. So I just, with COVID specifically, please reach out to us, because we have spent a lot of time. We even wrote a book on it for the food and beverage industry, but it crosses over very much into cannabis, on everything you need to know beyond staying 6 feet apart and wearing a mask. It really talks about the employee responsibility and communication outward, and how do you create a safe environment not only for your employees but also for your consumers and your customers.
Excellent. I couldn't agree more with you.
Can I add one thing real quick? I know we had talked about OSHA 30 earlier. Something for your employees is called OSHA 10. So what people aren't aware of, OSHA 30 is 30 hours of training, and OSHA 10 is a 10-hour class. This is something where, depending on states, you may be required. Like California requires there to be 2 employees. We recommend 2 managers because they will actually help it reinforce the culture. But sometimes when you're trying to implement this importance of safety and paying attention and slowing down, if you have the ability to do OSHA 10, it's another just recommendation we have. And it's 10-hour training class, and they can do it themselves, but it just really reinforces who you are as an organization, and that safety for everyone is very important.
It is. And OSHA actually just did a training, a cannabis specific OSHA. Did you guys see that? A cannabis specific training just for cannabis operators. So keep an eye out for that. Check on our LinkedIn too. I think we shared that earlier. So last question, Doug, why is it important to pre-qualify employees before hiring?
This is always one of those challenges, no matter what industry you're in, if you're growing and in a growth mode. And because the tendency is, hey, I got to get someone who will fog the mirror. Let's just get someone in there. And that can be obviously one of the most expensive things you can do from a time, morale, and a loss standpoint. One of the things I think you should look for first is really pre-qualify them on their culture. First of all, try and find them from a referral base where someone might know them, more personally. And if that's not the case, but definitely bring them in and find out a culture standpoint, what they've been through, what they're thinking, and then maybe even a physical. I mean, with today's day and age, depending on the job tasks that they're doing, if you're getting in and out of a distribution van or your cultivation, you got to really look at what they're doing. And so if it's possible, really looking at physically, are they capable to do the job that they need to do in a safe way? But really, it's almost like a computer. Better data in, better people in, better product you're going to have on the backside, pretty much across the board.
Right. And I mean, think about it. What if you want to hire a driver and you didn't check their record, their motor vehicle report, and they have DUIs and they are not allowed to drive for the company? So just important things to think about.
You just took the words out of my mouth, Stephanie. That literally, that is one of the biggest things I always tell people is you're emotionally investing in them. Set the guidelines for hiring them before they even come in. They will disqualify themselves 80% of the time. Now you're only interviewing a smaller group of people because through experience, we all have, oh, you didn't run an MBR? Well, we'll run it for you. And then they've already been working for you for a week. And then we find this out after the fact. So it's setting those protocols on the front end based on, like Doug said, the job descriptions and verifying what they are, who they are, because your employees are your biggest profitability and your biggest liability. So invest in them on the front end. Yeah. Invest in them on the front end so that you're both on the same page, because otherwise you could waste a lot of time, or furthermore, hire someone for a position that you can't because of insurance requirements.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, everybody. So those were the questions that we had just prepared for this call today, but I've seen a few in the chat, so we're actually going to go over those right now. I think, Brian, are you going to ask the questions? Is that how it?
Yeah, perfect. I'll jump back in here and help field these to give you a little bit of a
Thank
break,
you.
Stephanie. So I saw that question I think you were referring to in the chat window from Todd Wheeler. He asked a question. It was about midway through the session, so I'm not sure if you all have already sort of touched on it a little bit, but his question was relating to influence while driving. So his question is, what happens if you are driving under the influence and cause or have an accident, such as related to alcohol? There's liability to the bar that sold the alcohol. How does that relate to cannabis?
The driver has a DUI. Let's just
And
start
so
there.
I asked, I don't know if, and Todd is hilarious too. I don't know if anybody else has been seeing his comments here, but when I'm laughing, it's probably at what he said. So I'm wondering, is he asking from the standpoint of the business owner or of an employee? And I do get the implication about the dram shop type of law. Well, we all know that there are no dram shop laws for cannabis, but we can still give you a good answer. I just want to make sure that we understand the question.
Well, Todd, you've been really engaged throughout the session. Here's your time to engage once again with the panelists. What is the exact specificities of your question if you're still here? Let me see, browse the attendee menu. Still in here, Todd. Okay, perfect.
What I was looking at is there's two aspects.
You're related to the cannabis, or was it related to the business or the individual was the liability protection that you were referencing?
Yeah, we can answer from both sides. Go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, it's a DUI. So let's just simplify it as simple as that. There's nothing around it. And then secondly, I ultimately would go back to if someone is leaving a facility and they're under the influence, that's a break in protocol because they shouldn't have been under the influence or even consumed any product where they were. So there should be no liability there. If there was, that's going to be a whole other issue. I mean, this is about consumption, and consumption cannot be on any cannabis facility unless they have an on-site consumption lounge, which is a very unique space. Other than that, it would come back to personal liability, I think, on the individual, because were they under the influence before they arrived on where they were and after? I know on a work aspect, for us, we have a zero tolerance when it comes to drug and alcohol policy. So it's just like alcohol. If you are a driver and you are driving for a business, I am not concerned about what you are or not doing off of work hours. What I will tell you is we are going to do a post-drug test if you have an accident. And in the process of, even if you are not under the influence, because drug testing is so poor in cannabis and you come up positive, you will be terminated. So that comes down to your employee handbook, the job descriptions, how things will be handled. But furthermore, from there, it's really an understanding of what the person's doing. So I'm kind of coming at a consumer aspect, and I'm also coming at from an employee aspect on different ways of where the protection will fall or not fall.
Hey, Summer, this is Doug. What's your take on that one? Because I mean, I agree with Jesse on that one, but like from the liability, let's just say of the dispensary, most of the policies I think would have a lot of wiggle room to wiggle out of that, but hopefully there'd be some defense until negligence could be ascertained. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And that's kind of why I was asking for a little bit of specificity there. So from the general liability standpoint, there's no coverage, obviously, because the general liability policy is relegated to that specific address. And so we've all seen that endorsement that says this policy applies to this location specific. But from a product standpoint, there might be some defense there because I don't know what the circumstances are. But I do know in a claims scenario, obviously we would look at contributory negligence. So how do we know as the carrier, how do we know that he was under the influence of our product? One, on-site consumption is not legal. Two, if he did consume something on the premises at a consumption lounge, the sales area and the consumption area are separate. Three, how do we know that he only consumed our product? Was he under the influence of anything else? So all of those things would be hashed out during the claims process, during the investigation process. And 9 times out of 10, the injured party was not on just the one substance. You know, and I know we've done studies, and I know, Jesse, you've been privy to some of those things where, you know, trying to come up with an exact percentage or formula for analyzing the over the influence level for cannabis products. And when I've looked at some of the data for drivers and things, the funny thing, well, it's probably my warped sense of humor, but the funny thing is that drivers under the influence of cannabis don't tend to speed or drive recklessly. They tend to drive really slowly. So you know, it would be, that's a really long answer to your question, Doug. And the short answer is, we don't know yet. We'd have to determine whose fault it really was. And you have to prove negligence. You have to prove that the insured didn't do something that they were supposed to do, or they contributed to this incident by conducting their everyday business.
Right. One thing we do know is if they were injured during work hours, this would be a workers' compensation claim, and it would pay out, because at least in California, it's a no fault type of state. So speaking just for California, but I mean, it would be a workers' compensation claim as well.
And then also too, the contributory negligence factor does come in again, which is why a lot of, just like Jesse said, they do drug tests. So that process, that procedure is enacted to limit employers' exposure to loss, because if that person is under the influence, then something they did contributed to that loss. The payout and the response from the carrier is not the same as it would if it were any other type of scenario.
Brian, do we have time for one last question? Eric asked, where is breach of contract covered?
Yeah, great. I was literally messaging the panelists in the back end, asking you all the same. So if you all are available, then dive right into it.
Okay.
And we'll use that as the final question and start to wrap.
So team, where is breach of contract covered? There we go.
I think it's an excluded. So a lot of times when you're looking at insurance, you know, you have to look at something that they can quantify, and a breach of contract typically falls outside of a general liability, product liability policy. The basics of GL or PL, if you will, is bodily injury or property damage. You can have some economic loss, but a breach of contract, you know, show me the injured person, show me the broken down vehicle. And so that's more of a business risk. And so that's typically an uninsurable, whether we're talking cannabis or construction or agriculture. That's at least my quick answer to that.
My only thought is, and I agree with you, Doug, my only thought is there may be some coverage on directors and officers insurance, right? I mean, depending on if there was, for example, maybe someone trying to merge with another company, they didn't disclose their information properly, they're canceling the contract, now there's a suit. I've seen and heard of scenarios in that regard, but I don't know really if the question was directed to D&O, and that's a whole nother topic.
Yes.
I wanted to hear what Jesse was going to say. This is a great question.
I want to hear.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't have a lot to add. It was kind of, that's where I was going with what Doug said, and then also piggyback with Stephanie. It's like, it's kind of a gray area, and D&O is really the only thing I could think of that could. I can't think of fiduciary picking up. None of the other lines of business that we offer would, but I mean, one of the more recent questions that I've had people, and I'm sure we've all heard it, is, can I insure against possible losses? So it's like, oh, I'm investing in a company and the company fails, and then can I get insurance? And I'm like, no, that's just business 101, and you've got to do your due diligence on the front end. So there are areas currently, and it's not just with cannabis and hemp, but in all insurance, that we cannot find full protection. And this is really where you want to level up every aspect you can to make sure that there are very few gaps possible that could happen, and then work proactively on a continual plan that is not just, hey, we got it and it sits on the shelf. This needs to be engaged regularly, depending on how much your company is growing, how much you're thriving, and whether you're in one state or multiple states. It's ever changing, and you need to be on top of it.
Yep, and I love all of those answers. So I liked what Doug said about business risk, because we all, just by virtue of conducting business, there is just a risk of doing business. You know, your business concept could fail. You know, you could have thought you had $1 million idea and nobody wanted to buy it. So the contractual kind of obligation is very similar. So from an insurance coverage and policy language standpoint, there are what's called insured contracts that are covered by the contract, by the insurance policy, but those are not the typical type of contract that most people would think of. So an insured contract is a sidetrack agreement, an easement agreement, and those types of things. So those are pretty much the only type of contracts that are covered via insurance policy. The rest of them would be considered a business risk that you assume. So, you know, from that contractual liability standpoint, because I know that's something that's oftentimes seen in subcontract agreements. So there are in some instances bonding relationships that you can, you know, engage in, where I'm thinking specifically for construction contracts. So everybody has to put up a certain amount of money and say that they will do something, or this amount of money is on the line via a bond. But you know, the risk management tactics that we're talking about here would probably be the best method of avoiding or transferring those bad contractual obligations.
All right, perfect. Well, I think that was a very comprehensive and thorough response to that question from all of the panelists. So thank you all so much. I do know that we had a few outstanding questions that we weren't able to address during this live broadcast. So apologies both to Al and Afua. I do highly recommend you all taking the contact information from this contact information slide. Please follow up with any of the panelists or our risk management and insurance committee members at large at any time following the wrap of this session, and then stay on the lookout for the recording, as always, to be posted to our public webinar archive over the next few days. All right, and with that, we're going to close out today's session, as always, with a quick preview of some upcoming activities underneath the NCIA umbrella that we'd love all of your all's participation with while our panelists stick around in the room. So if you have any burning questions in the chat room, definitely feel free to engage with them over the next few moments while we close out today's session. All right, perfect. So in case any of you all missed it, we held the live days of our first ever virtual conference, the Cannabis Business Cyber Summit, earlier last month. Don't let FOMO set in, as the entire event will soon be on demand for all NCIA member business owners. As all of you all know, we kept the online portal platform open for 30 days past the live dates. However, we're in the process right now of transferring all of the 150 plus hours of amazing educational content, including a keynote conversation with Carlos Santana and Andrew Yang, into our members only community platform, NCIA Connect. So stay on the lookout for details on how NCIA members will be able to access all that amazing content in the next few weeks. And then if you are not an NCIA member, do make sure to head on to our website and secure membership so that you can get access to this amazing content as soon as possible. And then finally, we'll leave you all with a quick preview of the final Industry Essential program taking place this month, which will wrap up the year for us. We have a final year-end edition of our Service Solutions series entitled Coming Out of the Dark Ages, the Future of Controlled Environment Agriculture in Sealed Greenhouse Cultivation. Now, you might be asking, what is controlled environment agriculture? What is sealed cultivation? And what exactly does that control actually mean when we're talking about growing? Well, this webinar brought to you by the team at Series Greenhouse Solution will explore these very questions and why they matter for the professional cannabis cultivator. Whether you're a builder, grower, investor, someone who operates generally in the cannabis business sphere, or someone who is just interested in the future of cannabis cultivation technologies, this webinar will highlight some of the important technologies involved in modern greenhouse design, as well as Series' unique approach to facilitating cultivation to market strategies for those looking to enter the cannabis space. As always, our Service Solution series, which allows cannabis business owners the opportunity to learn more about premier products, services, and industry solutions directly from our network of established suppliers, providers, and thought leaders, is free and open to the public. Register today at our website, then invite as many of your industry colleagues or coworkers who might be interested in attending as well. All right. And with that, thank you all so much for participating in another NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar. A huge thank you again to our panelists, audience members, and most importantly, member business owners, which make our work possible here at NCIA each and every day. Special thanks once again to all the members of NCIA's Risk Management and Insurance Committee for developing and presenting today's program. Stay on the lookout for some amazing content and educational offerings to be rolled out by that committee as they delve into their one-year term as well. Please complete the attendee survey after leaving the meeting room. Doing so will grant you immediate access to our presentation file. And then do note that all NCIA member business owners will receive exclusive 30-day access to a formatted video recording first posted in our members-only community platform, NCIA Connect. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you all again next time for another Industry Essential educational webinar. We'll leave you all with this end of event credit sequence highlighting the 20+ member businesses that make up our Risk Management and Insurance Committee for the upcoming term, as well as the nearly 24 member businesses that participated in this afternoon session as well. As always, we'll showcase some audio stylings by the resident musician at our Colorado-based events, KJ Liss, and his Illinois-based musical side project, Indigo Sun. Enjoy, and we'll see you all later this week, hopefully on Wednesday, for the final Industry Essentials educational webinar of 2020. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone.